John, thank you for your time today. I had a blast chatting with you the first time this summer. I really enjoyed reading your book as well, Branded. Let's kick things off today with how did you meet Bob and learn about his unique and wacky story?
Well, first, Ryan, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And how I came to meet Bob Leach was I moved out to the country north of Dallas into the Pilot Point Aubrey area, which is a little east of Denton. And I was looking for a pony or a horse or something for my daughter's birthday party that first weekend we were there. So I figured I'd go knock on some doors, and see if somebody had an old mare, an old pony, or something laying around, that then we could use for the party. Well, I got a lot of doors slammed in my face, and later realized that these are $500,000 quarter horses, and no one's going to loan those. Uh, but I did strike gold at one particular ranch that was kind of nestled in between these sports ranches, and there was a woman standing in the drive. The gate was open. She had a horse saddled up on at the fence and was messing with her chaps and her hat and stuff and getting ready to ride. And I popped in there and introduced myself and told her I just moved in and was looking for a little pony or something for my daughter's party. And she looked back behind her at her husband, who was sitting in the truck about 500 yards down the road, and that happened to be Bob. And I never met him that day. He was elusive. She told me to take or to give my phone number to her, and that he would call me later. So um, no one ever called. I had my coffee, made my coffee the next morning, went out to the front porch, and there was a horse saddled up, tied up to my front porch, eating my bushes. So um, I thought that was kind of cool. So we used the horse for the day. He sent a ranch hand back down to get it later, and I tried to get a hold of him for the next 2 weeks to pay him for the horse, and the gate was always closed, and he was very, very evasive. I finally, the gate was open one time, and I finally, just drove on down to the little ranch house there and knocked on the door, and he cracked the door open just about an inch, and said, "Who is it?" And I said, I'm the guy up the street you loaned the horse to. So he popped the door open a little bit further, and I said, I wanted to pay you, for the horse. And he said, don't worry about it. It's on me. He goes, he asked me if I knew anything about appliances. I said, not really, So he wanted me to look at his oven. I took a look at his oven. I told him, this thing's fried. It was made in the 1950s. It still had a Swanson's pot pie burned into the bottom of the oven. And he pulls out a wad of cash as big as a Coke can out of his front pocket and starts peeling off $100 bills. And I'm just like, my eyes are just like wide open. And he gives me 600 bucks and he asks me if I can take care of that oven for him. And I'm like, I guess so. I don't know anything about it, but $600, I'll sure. So I went out and bought an oven and, $300 or something like that. I tried to give him his change back and he wouldn't take it. He said, keep it. And then that was just kind of the start of me doing a bunch of chores around his ranch, home improvement kind of stuff, replacing windows and sliding doors and things like that. I'd really never done any of that stuff in my life, to tell you the truth. The I think the wad of cash is what attracted me, but um, so I got very proficient at doing things around the ranch. He taught me how to ride a horse. He taught me how to rope calves, mend fences, and do farm work and ranch work and take care of animals and stuff. And then over that period of 2 years from 1999 to 2001, we became good friends. And, we went to the lake every weekend. We went out to dinner every Friday night. He's very generous to my kids and my family. He gave us some ponies and some horses and stuff. And we had full use of the ranch, anything we wanted to do the whole time we were there. And I never knew he was doing anything nefarious. It was not real evident. He kept it all pretty quiet in the background, cattle rustling. He'd roll in 18 wheelers full of cattle and unload them. I'd help him work them through the chutes, him and his crew of workers. And just really wasn't very evident to me, that anything bad was going on, until I moved away. I moved to Houston and took another job. And a week or two later, his name and picture are plastered all over the newspapers, all over the country. And, I said, that just can't be him. There's no way that's this guy. The Denton County Sheriff, Tracy Murphy, he was the ranger that was involved in arresting him the first time, and he labeled him, or he dubbed Bob as the nicest guy you'd ever meet. And so he's a real con man, and he really was the nicest guy I'd ever met. He just bent over backwards for me and my family, and a lot of other people too. You know, I just couldn't believe that this guy plastered all over the newspapers was the guy I knew. So I just started doing some research, and it was him. And you know, we just recently found out that he'd only been out of jail 4 or 6 months before I met him the first time. You know, borrowing the horse, and I had no idea. So that's kind of you know, the synopsis of how I met him, and then you know how I engaged with him over the 2 year period there at the ranch.
How quickly did you realize that this was a great story that needed to be told? And when were you able to carve out time to start doing some of your own research and connecting back with Bob and circling back to him?
I started out, you know, after I'd realized that, you know, this guy was a bad character, and you know that I was so, you know, I never realized I was so close to danger all the time I was with him. You know, there was always something going on in the background, you know, at the ranch. Um, I uh, I realized, you know, that this was a good story. Right, you know, that day I saw his picture and I confirmed it was him. You know, in the newspapers and the stories, and the newspapers just kept coming week after week. You know, just more stories about him. And then GQ magazine did an article on the Washington Post. Um, you know, so I thought all along I would write a biography about his life. You know, how did he get to where he is now? You know, and what influenced him when he was younger, and you know, through his cowboy years. You know, a lot of those years were in prison actually. But um, you know, I felt like it would be an interesting story to tell, and I started writing the biography. And then after a while, and doing the research, I realized I really don't like doing this. I really don't like all the research. I don't like going to courthouses and looking up records, and you know, it's very labor intensive, and I'm inherently lazy, and I just don't like to do that. And you know, so you know, after much prodding, and you know, about 15 years of sitting on all the articles and the stories and trying to find a way to present it, and nurturing from my wife and friends and family, you know, this is a great story. It should be a book, a movie, whatever. I said, yeah, 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 yeah. You know, everybody says that, you know, but then I, you know, one last campfire with all my friends, and some newcomers, you know, to our little campfire ring, you know, told me, you know, that you should really write a book. And so that's when the biography process started. But then I converted it over to a novel, a fiction novel, after I'd realized that um, just about everything that comes out of this guy's mouth is probably a lie or a con. And I could never verify anything for a biography in the first place. So um, you know, I was able to verify you know, the stories that were all printed in the newspaper and stuff like that, and then my personal stories with him over the 2 years I spent on his ranch. So I had some pretty good material, and then quite a bit of other material in the book is embellished, you know, to create, you know, the drama and the excitement around the crimes in the story.
So Bob is a man who has managed millions of dollars in illegal cash. Most of it supposedly buried under his North Texas ranch in 55-gallon drums. He has survived 19 stabbings, poisonous hamburgers, prison tear gas attacks, and being thrown over a third store railing while in jail. Now, you mentioned telling some of these stories around the campfire ring with some friends, and these stories are perfect for that. When you're sitting down, you mentioned you initially tried to do a historically accurate account, and it became too frustrating because sometimes fiction is more entertaining than actual facts. How much of Bob's story do you actually believe from your time working with him and getting to know him, and and how do you try to balance out fact from fiction?
Most of the story's true. Some of the characters in the book, and I won't say which ones are real and aren't. You know, they support his crimes through the years. You know, they give a little bit of color and a little bit of character and some background, you know, to his upbringing, and you know how he got involved in all this. Um, you know, how I balance the two, fact and fiction, is basically everything that is fact is in the book, and then everything that is fiction is basically just to add the color and the you know, some thrill and some excitement, you know, to keep the reader moving through the chapters. So, um, you know, I don't want to give away the book, you know, but you know, it does have it starts out with a bang, you know, and then it kind of reverts back to his childhood and takes you from his childhood on through to where he was arrested, and then you know, there was a lot of things around the ranch that I saw, you know, stories that I personally know, you know, guns being drawn and pointed at his head, and you know, girlfriends, you know, angry, and you know, he messed around with just about every woman that ever came around him, and you know, there were a lot of ladies running around the ranch, and it was much like the Playboy Mansion. You know, if Hugh Hefner had a ranch, this would be the Playboy, you know, West, I guess, or you know, that would be his motif. You know, a lot of ladies running around in scanty clothing, and you know, you see two girls come out of both sides of the barn, and two cowboys going the other way, pulling their pants up, that kind of thing. You know, there was a lot of drunkenness and you know, parties and house parties that nobody knew what was going on inside. You know, it was just a lot of cars and a lot of things going on, and um, you know, there were drugs involved on the ranch. You know, he, to my knowledge, he never did drugs. You know, but there were a lot of people that he surrounded himself with that did. And you know, there was some. You know, it's rumored that there was a big meth operation on the ranch at one time or another that kind of moved in for a couple of weeks and then moved out. And he was involved in much more than just cattle rustling. He was involved in the drug trade. He was involved in blackmail. You know, they would roll high dollar bankers and other people, you know, into their scheme and leverage them for money, you know, and you know, threaten to tell their family, you know, that they were involved in these activities and stuff. So he was really a con man's con man, and you know, he conned me for 2 years. I never knew what was going on. I asked him why you know, why he protected me like that, and he said that I was probably the most honest guy he ever met, and that you know, he didn't want to ruin my family or my kids, and you know, I was helping him out. I was genuinely helping him out around the ranch, you know, like a person, you know, like a helpful person, not somebody that wanted something and you know, wanted to leverage him for something. I was the only guy that never asked him for anything. Um, and you know, so there was a lot of nefarious activity at the ranch and around him all the time. The girls just seemed to flock to him for some reason. He had a way with words. He had a way with talking to women. You know, they would just fall all over him. And if you were to see him now, you know, you would think, you know, what's the big deal? Well, you know, he's been in prison for 23 years, so um, that can take a toll on your appearance. You know, he's missing most of his teeth, and you know, he's been beat up. The some of the stories about the poisonous hamburger and being thrown over the rail in prison and things like that, I'm a little skeptical about those. There's no way for me to prove those things, but he's been consistent in those stories when he tells them. And that's really all I have to go on for some of that stuff that happens behind those walls. And tear gas attacks, those are real. They go on lockdown. You know, and if there's, he was in a solitary confinement wing because he had escaped twice from jail before, so they didn't want to take a chance again, so they put him in solitary. And he was in a wing with a bunch of really bad characters like MS-13 and stuff like that, and they were always, you know, there was always upheaval on the wing there, you know, because of those guys, and he was just a cowboy in the middle of it, and they'd shoot tear gas down the hallways to settle everybody down, and sometimes he told me he had to stick his head in the toilet to get air, fresh air, you know, from the attacks. And when they finally released him out to the general population, that's when he said you know, he had a hard time adjusting to that coming from solitary confinement, and got into a lot of fights, and you know, he was thrown over the railing from the top deck. You know, he's been in the hospital numerous times from stabbings. One time he claims there was a poisonous hamburger that was sent to him, not knowing who, but he didn't want it that day, so gave it to somebody else, and the guy choked to death on it in his cell. And he just watched him die with, you know, grasping through the bars, you know, trying to get help, and he just died in a pool of vomit right there inside his cell. Things like that, and a lot of that stuff really didn't make the book. You know, that was, a lot of that stuff was cut out. So I consider those kind of backstories that I tell. You know, either I put them out on the website, or you know, when I'm talking to somebody, independently of the book, I'll tell those kinds of stories. But there's probably 100, 200 pages or so that ended up on the floor, before we went to editing. So quite a lot of interesting material never made the book.
You mentioned nefarious acts and all these crimes. So some of the crimes in the book are theft of animal medicines, cattle rustling, drug running, fraud, porn, kidnapping, rape, um, prison escapes. We talked about briefly there. If you were to be an armchair quarterback and try and label or characterize Bob, would you call him an adrenaline junkie, a compulsive liar, narcissist? How would you label or summarize him as a character in the book, but I guess more importantly as a real life person?
The nicest guy you'd ever meet. If you were to meet him today and not know about any of his previous activities, you would say that's just the nicest guy I've ever met. He'd bend over backwards for you, give you the shirt off his back, he'd give you money if you needed it. You got to remember, this guy had more money than he knew what to do with. He couldn't put it in the bank. He put it in walls. He buried it in the ground. He put it in suitcases. He put it all over the place because he just didn't know what to do with it. He gave a lot of it away to girlfriends. He bought them cars and trucks and paid for their college tuition, and just more money than he knew what to do with. And he started this out at 16 years old, and his dad had him trafficking cattle medicines, to local ranches, and they were making a lot of money doing that. And it was a competitive game. There were other crooked people in the business too, and a lot of law enforcement was involved, in a lot of those crooked arrangements, and the cattle rustling too. So um, he just had a lot of money, and he made, money makes friends. It never made me his friend, but I he was just nice to me, and that's what made him a friend to me. He's very giving and very nice. He never gave me money. I mean, except for when I bought something, he paid me back, or he usually gave me a few extra dollars for my labor, things like that. I never asked for anything either. I was intrigued with the ranch lifestyle, and I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to learn how to ride a horse. I wanted to learn how to rope. I wanted to do all that stuff. So he taught me all those things, and it was very short lived for me. It was just during that 2 year period, and then I moved in. I moved down to Houston, or down here where I'm at now, and took a new job. But I would say he is all those things you mentioned, but also the nicest guy you'd ever meet. So to characterize him in one word is kind of difficult. He's all those things. He's a narcissist. He's a liar. He's a con. He cheats the system. His dad always told him, if you ever want to get ahead in life, you got to color outside of the lines. And it took him a little while to figure that out. And then once he started coloring outside of the lines, he couldn't get enough of it. But he was also dragged into kind of a mob business, or a mob oriented atmosphere and environment, where he was forced to do a lot of these things or else. And there's a character in the book called Diamond Jim, and Diamond Jim is a big influence in his life. He's the one that forced him in the book to do all these activities. And he told him, son, you owe me. I bailed you out of jail. I paid all your legal fees. You owe me. And then Bob would ask him, uh, well, how long will I owe you for? And he says, you'll owe me until I say you don't owe me anymore, which is never. And so he was kind of trapped in that environment in the story, kind of a mob thing. The only way you're getting out of this is in a pine box, so to speak. So, um, and that was pushed on him his whole life. He was always really trying to run from that, but could never get away. So he rolled with it.
Final question for you, John. What were Bob's thoughts on the book? And I think when we talked before, there was an interesting story about supposedly a copy was stolen while he's in jail. He's became a bit of a celebrity within his jail with some inmates because of the stories in this book. So, what are Bob's thoughts on the book, and what's the background on how the book was received by some fellow inmates in prison with Bob?
Well, so the story about the stolen book, again, I got to think to myself, this guy, every time I talk to him, and I talk to him 2 or 3 times a day. Sometimes he calls me that much, just simple questions, or we talk about the book, and he loves the book. And he's peddling it, to his friends, in jail, and it's gaining, it's gaining traction really well in there. He's a good publicist, so. Uh, but he claims, and of course I can't prove this, that he left his copy of the book that I sent him on his bed, and he went to chow, and he came back and somebody had stolen it. It was gone. I said, well, it must be really popular if people are stealing it, But he says, I need another book. And I'm like, okay. So I sent him another book, and I didn't think about it at the time, but then it happened again. Oh well, my book got sprayed with tear gas. I need another one. So I know he's trading these things. He's for they used to
For something.
but he's trading them for something. He's trading them for stamps or paper or whatever. And so I caught on to that con real easy, and I told him, Bob, this, I sent him another book. And I said, Bob, this is the last one. I said, I can't give books away like this. Uh, it, and I'm on to you a little bit. I know what's going on. You're trading these things. I just joked with him. I said, are you trading these for stuff? And that kind of put a stop to it. He realized I was on to him. So he's coveting his last copy of the book. He's probably still got the first copy. I don't know. But, you never can really believe what he says. And, so uh, every time I talk to him, I'm hesitant about getting dragged into some con. You've got to be really careful with these guys.
Jon, where can listeners and people watching on YouTube, where can they connect with you, and where can they buy a copy of this book?
Okay, so that's an easy one. It's available on Amazon. So it's available in paperback, Kindle, and the audio version was just released. Um, and if you go to Amazon and type in "Branded" by Jon Armour, that's Jon, no H, it'll pop right up, and you can purchase it there. It's on Ingram Spark, which is another publishing outlet. Same thing. You can purchase the book there. Amazon is really the easiest. And I have an author website, jonarmour-author.com, and a Facebook page called the most notorious cattle rustler of our time. If you just Google or you search in Facebook for the most notorious cattle rustler of our time, and it'll pop up that page. And there's a couple of book trailers and stuff on each one of those sites that people can view to understand what the book's about. And like I said, it's based on a true story, so it's fictionalized as well. So it's a very good read, and it's an easy read. It's nothing complicated. It goes easily from chapter to chapter. You almost don't want to put it down, but you have to, because it's 18 hours worth of reading. So it's 609 pages. It's a long read, but people tell me that that haven't even read a book in years, that that they were engaged and couldn't wait to get back to it once they laid it down. So um, I'm happy that I'm hearing those things. I've got quite a few 5-star reviews on Amazon. I can't find anybody that doesn't like the book yet. And a lot of people tell me that it's written very well, and that it should do well. So um, I'm happy to have it out there. Happy to be entertaining people who are into this modern Western culture type material. And like I said, it has a little bit of added extra draw, that it is based on a true story.
Jon, thank you for your time today. Thank you for giving me an advanced copy of the book I read back in the summer. And thank you for sharing a little more today about Bob's unique life and some of his unique, wacky stories.
All right, Ryan, I appreciate you having me on, and I hope you enjoy the book.